Welcome to the Empathy Stories channel, where we explore powerful moments that remind us of the human connections that shape our lives. In today's story, a young millionaire's life takes an unexpected turn after an encounter with a homeless woman on the streets. What happens next will change everything he thought he knew about wealth, love, and redemption. The city was cold that night, with a biting chill that seemed to seep into the bones of anyone brave enough to be out in it. Alex Carter, a young entrepreneur who had built his fortune from the ground up, sat in his sleek black car, the engine humming softly as he made his way through the deserted streets of Manhattan. The skyscrapers around him were shrouded in darkness, their glowing windows offering only faint glimpses of the lives that existed inside. The city, for all its shine and glamour, felt colder than usual tonight. The glitter of wealth and success seemed to mock him, filling him with a hollow sense of emptiness that refused to be shaken. Alex was used to the feeling, despite the millions in his bank account, the luxurious apartment he called home, and the impressive career that he had built at such a young age. There was a void inside him, a void that only seemed to grow the more he accumulated. It was a paradox he couldn't quite understand. Everyone envied him, everyone admired him, but inside, he was alone. There was no one to share his success with, no one to ask him how his day had been, or to simply sit with him in the silence of the evening. And tonight, the loneliness felt more acute than ever. His thoughts were interrupted when he stopped at a red light. His gaze wandered lazily out of the window, and that's when he saw her, a woman sitting on the cold sidewalk across the street. She was huddled tightly in a threadbare coat, her arms wrapped around herself in an attempt to fend off the bitter cold. Her face was hidden beneath the hood, but the way she sat there so still, so lost, struck Alex in a way he couldn't quite explain. He had seen many people like her in the city. Homelessness was as much a part of the landscape as the towering buildings and the flashing lights. It was something that had become too easy to ignore, too familiar to provoke much thought. But tonight, it felt different. Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers tapping against the steering wheel. He could tell she was cold. Her head drooped slightly, the exhaustion clear in the way she held herself. Something about her, her vulnerability, stirred something in Alex, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He shook his head as if to rid himself of the thought. He had places to be, important meetings, business deals. His schedule was packed. His life, after all, wasn't going to stop for one woman on the street. But as the light turned green and his car began to move, Alex found his eyes lingering on her for just a moment longer. Her face, though hidden beneath the hood, seemed somehow familiar, as though he had seen her before. Perhaps he had. The city was filled with faces, with stories that never truly unfolded. Still, something about her called to him. He couldn't explain why. He shook his head again, pushing the thought aside. It wasn't his responsibility. There were charities for people like her, shelters that offered a warm bed and food. He was just one person. What difference could he make? Yet, as he made his way to his apartment, the image of the woman on the street lingered. It gnawed at him, gnawed at something deeper. He had seen the signs of success, the accolades and praises that followed him wherever he went. But now they seemed insignificant. What was the point of it all if he couldn't even offer a small act of kindness to someone in need? Why was it so easy to ignore the suffering that existed just outside his window? When he arrived at his upscale apartment, his mind was still restless. He entered the sleek building, greeted by the doorman with a polite smile. But the usual pleasantries felt empty. He stepped into his apartment, a modern duplex with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the sprawling city below. The view was spectacular, one that most people could only dream of. But Alex didn't see the city. He saw nothing. The same loneliness that had been with him all evening settled in. Heavier now, his apartment, with its marble floors and expensive furniture, felt cold and sterile. He shrugged off his jacket and tossed it onto the couch. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the city below. Alex walked over to the bar, poured himself a whiskey, and sat on the couch, staring out the window. The city stretched out before him, glittering like 1,000 diamonds. but it offered him no comfort. The world was moving, and yet he felt as though he were standing still. He raised the glass to his lips and took a sip, the warmth of the alcohol spreading through his chest. But the emptiness didn't fade. In fact, it seemed to grow, more pronounced than ever. As he set the glass down, his thoughts turned back to the woman on the street. He wondered who she was, what her story might be. He couldn't shake the image of her hunched form in the cold, her eyes looking out at the world with a mix of fear and resignation. Without thinking, he grabbed his keys and left his apartment. He didn't know why. It wasn't as if he could change anything, but he felt compelled to do something. Anything. As he drove back through the streets of Manhattan, the city felt different. It felt colder, harsher. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to find her. When he reached the place where he had seen her, she was gone. The streets were still empty, the city silent. A pang of frustration hit him, but he wasn't about to give up. He parked the car and stepped out into the cold, determined to find her. He walked the streets, his breath clouding in the air, scanning the sidewalk for any sign of her. Minutes passed, then an hour, before he finally spotted her, curled up on a park bench. Wrapped in a thin, warm blanket, Alex approached slowly, his footsteps muffled by the quiet of the night. He wasn't sure what he was doing, but something inside him urged him to keep going. When he was close enough, he spoke softly, so as not to startle her. "Hey," he said, "I saw you earlier, and I couldn't stop thinking about you. It's cold out here. Are you okay?" The woman stirred, her eyes flashing open, and for a moment, Alex thought she might run. But then she looked at him, her face wary, her body tense. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice low and guarded. "My name's Alex," he said, taking a small step back to show he meant no harm. "I just wanted to help. It's freezing out here. If you need a place to stay tonight, I have a spare room. You can rest. Get warm." She hesitated, eyeing him with suspicion, but the cold seemed to win over her fear. After a long moment, she spoke. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "I don't know," Alex replied honestly. "I just felt like it was the right thing to do." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a reluctant sigh, the woman nodded. "All right," she whispered. "I'll come with you." Alex smiled, a small but genuine smile. He helped her to her feet, and together they walked back to the car, the cold night wrapping around them like a cloak. Neither of them knew what this moment would mean, but both felt it was a step towards something that could change them forever. Alex stood in the middle of the darkened park, his eyes scanning the area with urgency. The cold wind had picked up, and the city seemed even quieter now, the sounds of life muffled by the snow that had started to fall in gentle flurries. He had walked up and down the streets, retracing his steps in hopes of finding her. And just as he was about to give up, he spotted her curled up on a park bench under a tattered blanket. The sight of her brought a strange mixture of relief and guilt. She looked so fragile, so small against the backdrop of the empty city. Her face was turned toward the sky, her eyes half shut, struggling to sleep despite the freezing temperatures. She was a stranger, yet something about her solitude tugged at Alex's heart. He felt a surge of empathy, and for the first time in a long while, his thoughts shifted away from himself. Slowly, he walked toward her, his footsteps crunching softly in the snow. As he neared, the woman stirred, her eyes flicking open. She noticed him immediately, a flicker of suspicion crossing her face. Her body tensed, pulling the blanket tighter around her, as if bracing herself for what might come next. Alex stopped a few feet away, instinctively raising his hands slightly to show that he meant no harm. "Hey," he said softly, his voice cautious. "I'm not here to hurt you." She watched him warily, her dark eyes flicking to his face and then back down at the ground. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but didn't. Alex could feel the weight of her distrust, and he didn't blame her. She had every right to be cautious. After all, who in their right mind would trust a stranger offering help in the dead of night? "I saw you earlier," Alex continued, trying to keep his voice steady, "and I couldn't stop thinking about you. It's freezing out here. I live nearby. If you're willing, I can take you somewhere warm." The woman's gaze sharpened, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something, uncertainty. Perhaps, before she spoke. And why would you want to help me? Her voice was low, guarded. What's your angle? Alex took a small step back, trying to show her that he wasn't a threat. He understood her suspicion. It was a natural response. No angle, he said with a soft chuckle. I just thought you shouldn't have to be out here alone. Freezing. I'm not asking for anything in return. I just want to make sure you're safe tonight. The woman didn't respond right away. Instead, she shifted uncomfortably on the bench, her face a mix of skepticism and need. Alex could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the toll that living on the streets had taken. Still, she hesitated, clearly torn between accepting the offer of warmth and the ever-present fear of trusting someone she didn't know. He waited patiently, giving her space. I know it's hard to trust people, he said, his voice quiet but sincere. But if you want to, I can take you somewhere safe. No tricks. I swear. She studied him for a long moment, and just when Alex thought she might refuse, she spoke again, her voice hesitant. You promise? No tricks? I promise, Alex said, his tone firm but gentle. You're safe with me. There was a long pause, and then, reluctantly, she nodded. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll come with you. Alex felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he didn't show it. Instead, he reached out a hand, offering it to her. Come on, let's get you out of the cold. She stood slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around her as she took his hand. The touch was tentative, her fingers barely brushing his. But Alex held on, gently guiding her toward the car. The night was still, save for the crunch of their footsteps on the snow. He had no idea where this encounter would lead, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was doing something that mattered. As they approached the car, Alex opened the door for her, and she climbed in hesitantly. The silence in the car was palpable, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Both of them were lost in their own thoughts. As Alex started the engine and pulled away from the park, he glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. Her face was turned toward the window, lost in the reflection of the city lights. Alex knew that the next few hours might change everything. But for now, all he wanted was to get her to safety. The rest could wait. The drive to Alex's apartment felt longer than it actually was, the silence stretching between them, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. Maya sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her hands clenched in her lap, unsure of what was happening, but too exhausted to protest. Alex, on the other hand, kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was racing. He didn't know what had prompted him to come back and search for her, to offer her help in the first place. It had been impulsive, a split-second decision that, in hindsight, seemed both reckless and right. As they pulled up to his apartment building, Maya couldn't help but glance up at the towering structure. It was nothing like the places she was used to. The sleek, modern design and the doorman in his sharp suit standing by the entrance made her feel out of place, like a visitor in a world she didn't belong to. But she didn't say anything. There were so many things she wanted to ask, so many things she needed to know, but she couldn't find the words. Alex led her into the building, through the marble lobby, past the elevators with their polished brass doors, until they reached the private entrance to his duplex. As they stepped inside, Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. The apartment was vast, almost too much so for just one person. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, the lights of the skyline twinkling like a sea of stars. Every piece of furniture was sleek, polished, and perfectly arranged, the kind of place that only existed in magazines. It was a far cry from the benches and alleys she had called home for the past few months. Feel free to make yourself at home, Alex said, breaking the silence. His voice was soft but genuine. You could take a shower, get warm, whatever you need. Maya nodded, her gaze still darting around the room. She had never seen anything like this before, and the luxury of it almost made her feel dizzy. She couldn't help but think of the contrast, her life on the streets and his life, seemingly perfect in every way. And yet, as she stood there in the spacious living room, the loneliness she saw in Alex's eyes earlier came back to her. He wasn't just helping her for some altruistic reason. There was something deeper, a need she could feel, even if she didn't understand it yet. "I don't know how to thank you," Maya said quietly, finally meeting his gaze. "I don't know what to say." Alex smiled faintly, rubbing the back of his neck. "No need to thank me. I just couldn't leave you out there. It's the least I can do." The words felt hollow to Maya, and she wondered what kind of man he was. Someone who could offer so much, yet still seemed like he was searching for something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Later that night, after she had showered and changed into a pair of old clothes that Alex had offered, Maya sat at the kitchen island, a steaming mug of tea in front of her. She felt strange in this setting, like a character out of place in someone else's story. The silence stretched on between them, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. Alex, who had been pacing around the kitchen, finally spoke. "You don't have to stay here forever. Maya, I'm not offering a permanent solution, but for tonight, you're safe." She looked up at him, and for the first time, she saw a glimpse of something in his eyes, a vulnerability, a need for connection. She didn't know why he was helping her, but she could tell it wasn't just out of charity. He was lonely, maybe even more so than she was. "I don't know what comes next," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But thank you. I don't think I could have made it through another night out there." Alex nodded, his gaze softening. "You don't have to worry about that anymore. We'll figure it out." As they sat there in the quiet of the apartment, a new understanding passed between them. It wasn't love. Not yet. It wasn't even friendship, but something raw and human. The recognition that, sometimes, the most unexpected encounters could change the course of someone's life. Alex had saved her from the cold, but perhaps, in some strange way, she had saved him too from the hollow, aching loneliness that had haunted him for far too long. In the days that followed, their connection deepened. Maya didn't stay in the apartment forever, but she was given a chance to rebuild, to start over, and to find a way out of the life she had been trapped in for so long. And Alex? He found something he hadn't even realized he was missing: purpose, companionship, and a sense of fulfillment that his wealth and success could never provide. They both knew their story was just beginning. Thank you for watching this touching story. Alex's journey reminds us that no amount of success can replace the deeper connections we crave. If this video moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge and inspire us all.